Hi there, this is your favorite host San giving you yet another Python tutorial video for beginners. In this video we are going to implement two different versions of while loop to output and input a string in reverse order. Consider this tutorial video as additional exercise to practice while loop. However, keep in mind that there are other ways to achieve this. For example, there is an easier way to get the reverse of a sequence that does not require a use of a while loop. I will discuss the third and the easiest method after presenting two methods that involve while loop. So please watch the full video to find the bonus method that can be used to easily reverse and input data. Before starting to write our while loop program, let's take a minute to revisit index numbering in Python. If you recall, items in a string or any sequence in Python are indexed from left item starting from 0 and incrementing by 1 for each item. So the leftmost item will be index value 0, the next one would be index value 1, and so on. There's also a negative indexing system in reverse order, where last item is indexed at -1, the next to that is -2, -3, and so on. If we consider an example string trial that spells trial, what we want to start with is an empty variable, and we want to store the alphabets from the string trial starting from the end. So L would be integrated first or added to the empty variable first, and then the next alphabet, and so on. So our output would be in the reverse order. For the trial input, as our input is string, we would be getting LAIRT in the reverse order from TRIAL. And in this video, first we will use the positive indexing with the while loop. We will then do negative indexing values with the while loop in second example. And in the bonus example, we will use a different technique called a slicing technique to achieve the same output. I want to note that your support means a lot to me. Making more contents like this video is possible only when we have viewers and subscribers like you. So thank you for watching and supporting my previous videos. If you like these contents, please like, share, subscribe. So let's get right to it. In the first method, I want to show how we can use positive indexing values of the string with a while loop. So let's say I have a string that's something like a loop tap, a word trap. So my sequence is this string here, and I want to start with a reverse sequence as an empty string. So when I'm using positive indexing, the first index starts from 0 and increments. Every index value is either 0 or a positive number. So when I'm using positive indexing, I would like to start from the end value, which is the last item. So I would need to know the length of my sequence. So let's say I equals length of my sequence, and in my while loop, when I'm starting at the end, I want to go from end to the first item. So as long as my index value is more than 0, because the first item here has index value of 0, I'm reversing my order. And what I want to do is at each iteration, I want to add to this reverse sequence. So reverse sequence plus equals my sequence I minus 1. So what this does is for the first iteration, my I value is equal to the length of the sequence, which is how long the sequence is. In the first iteration, it would look at the last item, which is the P value, and the -1 basically does take care of the sequence starting from 0. So if my last item was fifth item, it would look at index value 4 basically. So that's what the -1 does. And to skip the infinite loop, I would have to change the I value. So I value would go in reverse order. So every time I do iteration, I want to reduce the I value all the way down to 0. So like that. And when I'm done, I want to print reverse sequence at the end. And let's see if this runs. So in this first example, you see we started with my sequence, and we started putting each alphabet from the end into an empty string. My indexing is always positive, and the while loop runs as long as I is greater than 0, which is positive value. And I start with the length of my sequence. So when I start, my I value is taking the index value of the last alphabet and implementing. When we implement while loop, that last alphabet is appended or added to the empty sequence, which is the reverse sequence, which is empty at the beginning. And again, in each iteration, it just adds the last alphabet or the next to the previous alphabet into this reverse sequence. And the I value changes after each iteration to decrement by 1. And when the while loop is done, you would print out the reverse sequence. And as you saw, with this positive index value on the while loop, um, the input string is reversed in the output when after executing the code. Next example of using while loop I want to show is using negative indexing. So if you recall negative indexing, the last item is always -1. So therefore, instead of saying I -1, it would be easier to say 0 minus I in this case when we are using negative indexing. And then so I would, instead of starting always as a positive number, I would start I equals to, let's say, 1, and then while I is less than or equal to length of my sequence, would want to run this while loop. I would start I with 1, and I'm inside my while loop, I'm reversing the order. So 0 minus I, which is 1 here. So this means 0 minus 1, which is -1. So I'm in the beginning, I'm looking at the -1 index value of my sequence. So that means I'm looking at the alphabet, the last item in this string, and I'm adding that to my reverse sequence, which is empty at the beginning. And now, instead of doing decrement, I would like to do increment here by 1. I think that's all. Let's run this and see. So yeah, we get the same output with this negative indexing as well, as you can see here. So we started with loop tap or word trap. In reverse order, we get part draw of bat loop. In the third example, I would like to show you a different technique which doesn't involve while loop. In this case, I would use a slicing technique, and how I could do that is if I have the same input, my sequence, how this would work is the slicing technique. If we are doing a double colon here, what this does is the step element determines the element. With this double colon, the slicing technique, this would return the slice of a string that starts at the end and step backward one element at a time, given the -1 input here. Let's see if that runs. That ran without any error, so there's nothing wrong with this, even though we get this highlight warning sign here. Let's just print this and see what happens on the output. And as you saw, we get the similar output that we saw from the previous two examples. So negative slicing technique can be used instead of using a while loop, which takes a lot of code. Um, this is the easiest way to reverse input string. And this technique doesn't always doesn't necessarily only work for string data type. So let's say I have, instead of a string input, let's say I have a list of items, and my sequence is still the same. I'm just changing the items or the data types from a string to a list. And if I run this, this technique would reverse the order of the items in the output when we run this code. So just to recap, in today's video, we use while loop to reverse an input string as an output on a reverse order. So we had an input as a string data type, and when we run this two different while loops using positive and negative indexing, we got a reverse order on our output for the string. We also use slicing technique to reverse an input sequence, whether that's a string or a list. It could also be equally implemented in other data types, and you can try those on your own and see how it behaves. Hope you like this video. Please like, share, and subscribe, and see you in the next video.